The Blackwood Ravine was a death sentence, a place where no wolf had returned from in 20 years. Sophie Mercer screamed as she was dragged to the edge, her heels digging into the frozen earth. To her pack, she was just an outcast Omega, the price they were willing to pay to survive the brutal winter. They thought they were feeding a helpless girl to a mindless beast to appease a curse. But they were wrong. The monster lurking in the shadows wasn't a beast at all. He was Decan Blackwood, the Alpha King they had betrayed and left for dead. And he isn't going to accept the sacrifice. He's going to burn their world to the ground. The winter of 2024 had hit the town of Oak Haven harder than any in recorded history. For the humans in the valley, it was just climate change, a freak polar vortex that froze pipes and shut down the interstate. But for the Silver Moon Pack, hidden deep within the forested ridges of the Montana wilderness, the cold felt like a judgment. Prey had vanished, the deer were diseased, and for the first time in a century, pups were dying in the womb. Alpha Richard Salinger, a man who preferred to be called Rick and wore expensive Italian suits to hide the brutality of his nature, stood at the head of the mahogany table in the pack house. The air smelled of stale coffee and fear. "We are out of options," Rick said, his voice low. He didn't look like a starving wolf. He was well-fed, skimming off the top of the pack's dwindling treasury. "The Oracle has spoken. The curse on our land is blood debt. It requires a payment." The pack elders nodded, murmuring amongst themselves. They were desperate men, willing to believe anything to save their own skins. "And who pays the debt?" asked Elias, Rick's beta. Rick's eyes slid toward the kitchen door, where a young woman was scrubbing pots, her hands red and raw from the scalding water. Sophie Mercer, 22 years old, an Omega. Sophie wasn't just an Omega by birth, she was made one by circumstance. Her parents had been the previous Gamma pair, loyal and strong, until a hunting accident 5 years ago left them dead, and Sophie unprotected. Rick had demoted her instantly, seizing her family's assets and turning her into the pack's maid. She was the perfect scapegoat. No family to mourn her. No mate to fight for her. "Sophie," Rick called out. The scrubbing stopped. Sophie turned, wiping her hands on her stained apron. She was thin, too thin, with dark circles under eyes that held a surprising shade of violet. "Yes, Alpha? Leave the dishes. Get your coat." Sophie froze. It was 10 degrees below zero outside. "Sir, is there an errand?" "We're going for a drive," Rick said, a cruel smile touching his lips. "To the Blackwood Ravine." The room went deathly silent. Even the fire in the hearth seemed to sputter. The Blackwood Ravine was forbidden territory. It was the site of the great betrayal 20 years ago, where the old High King had fallen. Legend said a cursed wolf roamed those woods, a creature of shadow and bone that ate the souls of trespassers. "Why?" Sophie's voice trembled. She looked around the room, pleading with her eyes. She saw her childhood friends, people she had grown up with. Sarah, the baker, Tom, the patrol guard. They all looked away. That was the moment Sophie realized the truth. This wasn't an errand. "The pack needs to eat, Sophie," Rick said, walking over and gripping her upper arm hard enough to bruise. "And the beast of the ravine demands a trade. One life for the prosperity of the many. You should be honored. You're finally going to be useful." She tried to pull away, panic flaring in her chest. "No, Rick, please. You can't just grab her," Rick barked. 2 enforcers, men Sophie had once shared lunch with in the school cafeteria, stepped forward. They didn't hesitate. They grabbed her arms, dragging her toward the heavy oak doors. "Please," Sophie screamed, her heels digging into the floorboards, leaving scuff marks that would serve as the only evidence she had been there. "You can't do this. It's murder. It's survival," Rick shouted over her screams. "Take her to the SUV! Tie her hands!" They dragged her out into the biting cold. The wind howled like a dying animal. As they shoved her into the back of the black Cadillac Escalade, Sophie locked eyes with Rick one last time. "If I die," she hissed, tears freezing on her cheeks, "I pray I become the curse that ends you." Rick just laughed, slamming the door shut. "Drive." The convoy of 3 cars wound its way up the treacherous mountain pass. Sophie sat in the middle seat, hands bound with silver-infused rope that burned her skin. She didn't cry anymore. She was past tears. She was in a state of cold, hard shock. They reached the drop-off point an hour later. The road ended at a rusted guardrail. Beyond it lay the ravine, a massive gorge filled with ancient, twisted pines and a fog that never lifted. Rick hauled her out of the car. The wind here was ferocious, tearing through her thin wool coat. "Walk," he ordered, pointing to a narrow deer trail leading down into the abyss. "I won't," Sophie said through chattering teeth. Rick sighed, pulled a Sig Sauer P226 from his holster, and racked the slide. "You walk, or I shoot you in the kneecaps and throw you down. At least if you walk, you have a running start before the beast smells you." Sophie looked at the gun, then at the dark, foreboding woods. She looked at the faces of the pack members standing by the cars. They looked guilty, terrified, but relieved it wasn't them. She turned her back on them. "I hope you all rot," she whispered. She took the first step down the trail, then the second. She didn't look back as the engines started up and the Silver Moon pack abandoned her to the dark. Sophie walked until her feet were numb blocks of ice. The deeper she went into the ravine, the stranger the atmosphere became. The biting wind died down, replaced by a heavy, unnatural stillness. The trees here were massive, their trunks as wide as cars, blocking out the grey sky. She knew she was going to die. If the cold didn't get her, the wolves would. Or the cursed wolf. She stumbled over a root and fell hard into the snow. She lay there for a moment, the will to get up draining out of her. "Just close your eyes," a voice in her head whispered. "It will be like going to sleep." Crack. The sound of a twig snapping echoed like a gunshot. Sophie scrambled up, backing against a tree. "Hello!" she called out, her voice raspy. Silence. Then a low, vibrating growl that seemed to come from the earth itself. From the shadows of the tree line, a shape emerged. It was a wolf, but it was unlike any wolf Sophie had ever seen. It was massive, easily the size of a grizzly bear. Its fur was pitch black, matted and wild, and its eyes were glowing with a terrifying amber luminescence. Scars crisscrossed its muzzle, silver lines against the black fur. This was the beast, the cursed wolf. Sophie stopped breathing. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the teeth. But the attack didn't come. She opened one eye. The massive wolf was standing 10 feet away, watching her. It tilted its head, an oddly human gesture. It sniffed the air, its ears twitching. Then it turned around and walked a few paces away. It stopped and looked back at her, letting out a sharp chuff. Follow. It was insane. It was suicide. But Sophie had no other choice. She pushed herself off the tree and followed the monster. They walked for another mile until the trees cleared, revealing a sight that made Sophie gasp. Nestled against the sheer cliff face was a structure that shouldn't exist. It was a sprawling, stone manor. Architectural style vaguely Gothic, but clearly built with modern reinforcements. It looked abandoned. Vines crawled up the stone walls, and several windows were boarded up. But smoke curled from a massive chimney. The wolf trotted up the stone steps and nudged the heavy front door open with its nose. It waited. Sophie hesitated at the threshold. "You want me to go in?" The wolf growled low, impatient. She stepped inside. The warmth hit her first. A massive fireplace dominated the main hall, logs crackling. The room was dusty, filled with furniture covered in white sheets like ghosts of a past life. The wolf walked to the center of the room, and then the sound of bones cracking filled the air. Sophie turned away, covering her ears. The shift was a private, painful thing, especially for a wolf of that size. When the sound stopped, a deep, rough voice spoke. "You're not from the Blackwood line. You smell like sulfur and cheap fear." Sophie turned around slowly. Standing by the fire, wrapping a tattered flannel blanket around his waist, was a man. He was terrifying. He stood well over 6'5", his body a map of corded muscle and jagged scars. His hair was long, black and unkempt, falling over his eyes. A thick beard covered his jaw, but it was his eyes that held her. They were the same amber as the wolf's, intelligent, angry, ancient. "Who are you?" he demanded. He didn't sound like a mindless beast. He sounded like a king addressing a peasant. I'm Sophie," she stammered. "Sophie Mercer, from the Silver Moon Pack." The man's lip curled in a sneer. Silver Moon, Rick Salinger's lot of cowards. He walked toward a dusty liquor cabinet, not seeming to care about his lack of clothing. He poured a glass of amber liquid. "Let me guess. The winter was hard. The game is gone. Salinger got scared. He remembered the old stories about the sacrifice." He turned back to her, taking a sip of the drink. "So he tossed you down here like a piece of meat to feed the boogeyman. Is that it?" Sophie felt a spark of anger cut through her fear. "Yes, that's exactly it." The man laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Pathetic. Salinger always was a superstitious idiot." He walked closer to her. The sheer size of him was overwhelming. He smelled of pine, wood smoke, and something uniquely masculine, rain on hot asphalt. He leaned down, sniffing near her neck. Sophie flinched, but she didn't run. "You're an Omega," he noted, pulling back. "But your bloodline, it's strong. Gamma blood." "My parents were Gammas," she whispered. "Were. They died. Of course they did," the man muttered. He looked her up and down, his gaze clinical, yet intense. "Well, Sophie Mercer, you have two choices. The door is open. You can walk back out into the snow and freeze to death. Or you can stay here, keep your head down, and stay out of my way." "Who are you?" Sophie asked again, gaining a little bravery. "Everyone says you're a cursed monster." The man walked back to the fire, staring into the flames. The shadows danced across his scarred back. "I've been called many things," he said softly. "Monster. Beast. Traitor." He turned his head slightly, just enough for her to see the sharp profile of his face. "But before they cut my throat and threw me into this ravine 20 years ago, my name was Decan Blackwood." Sophie's knees gave out. She grabbed the back of a covered sofa to steady herself. Decan Blackwood, the Alpha King, the ruler of all 5 packs in the territory. History books said he had gone mad and tried to slaughter his own council, forcing the other Alphas to put him down for the good of the region. "You're dead," she breathed. "They buried you." "They buried an empty coffin," Decan growled. "And they didn't kill me. They just broke me." He looked at her, his eyes blazing. "Welcome to hell, Sophie. Try not to make a mess." For the first 3 days, Sophie and the beast, Decan, lived in a tense, silent orbit around one another. The manor was a mausoleum of dust and shadows. It had clearly been magnificent once, a seat of power that rivaled any royal palace, but 20 years of neglect had turned it into a tomb. Sophie, unable to sit idle and wait for death, began to clean. It was the only thing she knew how to do. She found a broom in a supply closet and started with the main hall. Declan watched her from the shadows. He spent most of his time in his wolf form, prowling the perimeter of the manor, or sitting in the high-backed leather chair in the library, staring at a massive, ancient map of the territory spread out on the desk. He didn't speak to her, but he provided for her. Every morning, there was fresh meat on the kitchen counter, venison, wild hare, once even a pheasant. He would leave it there, raw and bloody, and disappear. Sophie learned to skin and cook the game over the open fire, the smell of roasting meat slowly chasing away the scent of decay in the house. On the fourth night, the silence broke. Sophie was in the library. She had found a stack of old journals bound in cracked leather. They were ledgers of the pack's history, dating back 100 years. As she read, a realization began to dawn on her, a piece of the puzzle that didn't fit with the lies Rick had fed the pack. "You're not cursed," she said aloud, her voice echoing in the cavernous room. She didn't hear him enter, but she felt the drop in temperature. Declan was standing in the doorway, human form, wearing a pair of dark, worn jeans he must have scavenged from a closet. His chest was bare, the scars silver in the firelight. "What did you say?" His voice was a low rumble. Sophie turned to face him. She held up one of the ledgers. "I read the entry from 20 years ago, the year you died. The harvest was record-breaking. The herds were huge. The pack was wealthy." Declan walked into the room, taking the book from her hand. His fingers brushed hers, rough and calloused, sending a jolt of electricity up her arm that made her breath hitch. He tossed the book onto the desk. "That was before the betrayal," he said. "Rick says the land is cursed because the old gods are angry," Sophie pressed, stepping closer. "He says the winter is punishment. That's why he sacrificed me, to appease the land." Declan laughed, a dark, humorless sound that vibrated in his chest. He walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered ravine. "Rick is a fool," Declan said. "The land isn't angry at you, Sophie. It's starving. It's dying because the bond was broken." "What bond?" Declan turned, his amber eyes glowing. "The Alpha King isn't just a title, it's a tether. The Blackwood bloodline is tied to the earth of this territory. We feed the land, and the land feeds the pack. It's a symbiotic magic. When Rick and his father, that treacherous snake Samuel, slit my throat and threw me off the cliff, they severed the connection." Sophie's eyes widened. "So, the famine, the freezing winter, the barren wombs." "It's not a curse," Declan growled, his hands clenching into fists. "It's absence. The land knows its king is gone from the throne. It recognizes Rick for what he is, a parasite. The territory is rejecting him. It's shutting down." He walked over to the fireplace and poked the logs violently with an iron rod. "They think killing you will fix it?" He scoffed. "They could sacrifice 1,000 Omegas. They could paint the snow red with blood. It won't bring the spring back. Only the king can bring the spring." Sophie stared at him. The monster she had been terrified of was actually the savior her people were praying for. "Then why do you stay down here?" she asked, her voice trembling with frustration. "If you're the king, if you have the power, why let them suffer? Children are hungry, Declan. Good people are freezing." Declan froze. He turned on her, his face twisting into a mask of rage. He closed the distance between them in a second, backing her up against the heavy oak desk. "Good people!" he roared. Where were these good people when Samuel Salinger dragged me out of my bed in chains? Where were they when they accused me of treason with forged letters? Where were they when they watched the execution and cheered? Sophie couldn't breathe. His anger was a physical force, hot and suffocating. I was 25 years old, Declan whispered, his voice cracking with raw pain. I had a mate. Her name was Isabel. Rick wanted her. So he helped his father kill me. Sophie gasped. What happened to her? She rejected me, Declan said, the words falling like stones. Before they threw me over, she looked me in the eye and rejected our bond. She spat on me, and then she walked away with Rick. The silence that followed was heavy with grief. Sophie felt a pang of sympathy so sharp it actually hurt. He hadn't just lost his crown. He had lost his soul. I survived the fall, Declan continued, stepping back, his energy spent. I crawled into this ruin. I healed, and I watched. I watched them rot. I control the land, Sophie. I am the curse. I'm letting the winter kill them, because they deserve it. Not all of them, Sophie said softly. Declan looked at her, his eyes weary. You think you're different? I know what it's like to be thrown away, she said, lifting her chin. I know what it's like to lose everything, because a Salinger wanted more power. Rick killed my parents to get their gamma seat. He made me a servant. She took a step toward him, reaching out a hand. She didn't know why, but she wanted to touch him, to soothe the jagged edges of his soul. We are the same, Declan. We are the ghosts they created. Declan looked at her hand, then up at her violet eyes. For a moment, the amber glow in his eyes softened. The beast receded, leaving just a man. A lonely, broken man. No, he rasped. You are not like me. You still have light in you. I am nothing but darkness and cold. He turned and stormed out of the library, shifting into his wolf form mid-stride. Sophie heard the front door slam open as he ran out into the night, hunting something to kill so he didn't have to feel. But Sophie didn't retreat. She looked at the map on the desk. She traced the lines of the territory. He's wrong, she whispered to the empty room. He's not darkness. He's just winter. And winter always ended. A week later, the dynamic shifted again. Sophie had found the manor's generator in a shed out back. She had managed to fix the wiring, a skill she'd picked up from her father. And now, parts of the manor had electricity. The hum of the lights made the place feel less like a crypt and more like a home. She was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables she had found in a root cellar that had miraculously stayed preserved by the magic of the house. The knife slipped. Ah! Sophie hissed, dropping the knife. A deep gash opened across her palm, blood welling up bright red. Before she could even reach for a towel, a blur of motion swept into the room. Declan was there. He grabbed her wrist, his grip firm but gentle. Be careful, he growled, but there was no malice in it, just panic. He pulled her toward the sink, running her hand under cold water. The proximity was dizzying. He was standing right behind her, his chest pressing against her back. She could feel the heat radiating off him, could smell that intoxicating scent of rain and wood smoke. It's just a cut, Sophie said, her heart hammering against her ribs. Omegas heal slowly, Declan muttered. He shut off the water and inspected the wound. This needs binding. He led her to the kitchen table and made her sit. He retrieved a first aid kit from a cabinet, one he must have stocked himself. He sat opposite her, his large hands working with surprising dexterity as he cleaned the cut with alcohol and wrapped it in gauze. Sophie watched him. His face was set in concentration. The beard hid his jawline, but she could see the strength of it. He was handsome, in a rugged, terrifying way. Why do you care? She asked quietly. Declan didn't look up. You're my guest. Guests shouldn't bleed. I thought I was a sacrifice. He paused, his thumb brushing over the bandage on her palm. He looked up, and for the first time, Sophie saw something other than anger in his eyes. She saw desire. It was raw and terrifying, but it was there. You ceased to be a sacrifice the moment you looked me in the eye and didn't scream, he said. The air in the kitchen grew thick. The tension was palpable, a magnetic pull that seemed to be drawing them together. Sophie felt a strange heat in her chest, a fluttering that she recognized from the old stories. The mate bond. It was impossible. He was the Alpha King. She was a demoted Omega. But the pull was undeniable. It wasn't fully formed. It had been dormant for years, likely suppressed by his trauma and her status, but it was waking up. Declan seemed to feel it too. His pupils dilated. He leaned in just an inch. "Sophie," he breathed. Suddenly his head snapped up. His nostrils flared. The softness vanished, replaced instantly by the predator. "Declan?" Sophie asked, alarmed. "Quiet," he hissed. He stood up, knocking the chair back. He moved to the window, peering through the cracks in the boards. "What is it?" "Wolves," Declan said, his voice dropping to a lethal growl. "Intruders. They've crossed the ravine line." Sophie stood up, clutching her bandaged hand. "Is it a rescue party?" Declan turned to her, his expression grim. "Rick doesn't send rescue parties, Sophie. He sends clean-up crews." He walked over to a hidden panel in the wall and pulled out a massive recurve bow and a quiver of arrows. He tossed a heavy winter coat at her. "Put this on. Go to the library. Lock the door. Do not come out until I tell you." "I'm not hiding," Sophie said, grabbing a heavy iron skillet from the stove. It was ridiculous, but it was all she had. "If they're here for me, I'm going to fight." Declan looked at her, at the skillet, and then at the fire in her eyes. A small, impressed smirk touched his lips. "Fine," he said. "Stay behind me. If they get close, swing for the head." He opened the back door. The wind howled, carrying the scent of intruders. "Let's go say hello to my old friends," Declan said, his voice dark with promise. The snow outside was knee-deep. Declan moved through it like a ghost, Sophie struggling to keep up in his wake. They positioned themselves behind a cluster of boulders overlooking the main approach to the manor. There were 4 of them. Sophie recognized them instantly. They were Rick's elite guard. Wearing tactical gear and white camouflage, they moved with military precision. Leading them was Jax, a brutal enforcer known for enjoying his work a little too much. "Spread out," Jax's voice carried over the wind. "Rick wants proof of death. Find the girl's body. If the beast is real, kill it. Bring me its head." Sophie shivered. They weren't just checking. They were hunting. 4 of them, Declan whispered. "I'll take the 3 on the left. You watch my back." "Declan, you can't take 3 armed shifters in human form while—" He didn't listen. He didn't shift into a wolf. Instead, he stepped out from behind the rock, standing tall and exposed in the clearing. "Get off my land!" Declan's voice boomed, amplified by Alpha command. The 4 enforcers froze. They spun around, raising their assault rifles. "What the hell is that?" one of them shouted. Jax squinted. "Just a squatter. Drop him." They opened fire. Sophie screamed, but Declan moved faster than humanly possible. He didn't just dodge, he blurred. He closed the distance to the first man in a heartbeat, grabbing the barrel of the rifle and bending it upward with a sickening screech of metal. With a backhand blow, he sent the man flying 20 feet into a tree. The man slumped, unconscious. The other 2 fired, but Declan was already moving, a whirlwind of violence. He fought like a demon, using his bare hands to disarm and dismantle trained soldiers. He broke an arm, shattered a kneecap, and threw the 3rd man into the snowdrift. Jax, the leader, panicked. He dropped his gun and shifted. his clothes shredded as he transformed into a large grey wolf. He lunged for Declan's throat. Declan roared, a sound that shook the snow from the trees. He didn't shift. He caught the wolf in mid-air. It was a feat of strength that defied logic. Declan caught the 150-pound wolf by the throat, slamming him into the frozen ground. He held him there, his grip like a vice. "Yield!" Declan shouted, his eyes glowing so bright they looked like twin suns. The grey wolf whined, thrashing, but Declan's dominance was absolute. The alpha aura coming off him was suffocating. It forced the wolf to shift back into human form. Jax lay naked and shivering in the snow, Declan's hand around his throat. "Please," Jax choked out. "Don't kill me." Sophie ran out from the rocks, the skillet forgotten in the snow. She stared at Declan. He was breathing hard, steam rising from his skin, but he wasn't injured. The bullets had grazed him, but the wounds were already closing. "Why are you here, Jax?" Declan demanded, tightening his grip. "Rick doesn't send his head of security just to check on a sacrifice." Jax's eyes darted to Sophie, then back to the monster above him. The wedding." Declan paused. "What wedding?" "Rick," Jax sputtered. He made a deal with the Iron River Pack. He's marrying Isabella next week." The name hung in the air like a curse. Declan went perfectly still. "Isabella?" "Yes," Jax wheezed. "Her father is the alpha of Iron River. They have food. They have money. Rick is selling the Silver Moon territory to them in exchange for the alliance. He's going to merge the packs." Sophie gasped. "He can't. That would erase our pack. We'd be second-class citizens in our own home." "He doesn't care," Jax said. "He just wants the money. The wedding is on the winter solstice, in 3 days. Declan released Jax's throat, standing up slowly. He looked up at the grey sky, snow falling on his face. "He's marrying Isabella," Declan whispered. "The woman who had betrayed him. The woman who had been his fated mate, who had rejected him for power. And now Rick was using her to sell out the very land Declan was protecting. It wasn't just betrayal anymore, it was desecration." Declan looked down at Jax. "Run!" Jax blinked. "What?" "Run back to Rick," Declan said, his voice deadly calm. "Tell him you found the girl. Tell him she was dead. Tell him the beast is real, but you killed it." Jax scrambled backward in the snow, terrified. You want me to lie to him?" "I want him to feel safe," Declan said, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "I want him to think he's won. I want him standing at that altar, thinking he owns the world." Jax didn't ask questions. He shifted back into his wolf form and bolted into the woods, tail tucked between his legs. Sophie walked up to Declan. She touched his arm. He was trembling, not from cold, but from rage. "Declan?" He turned to her. The amber fire in his eyes had settled into a cold, hard diamond. "I'm done hiding, Sophie," he said. "Rick wants a wedding? Fine. I'll give him a funeral." He looked at the manor, then back at the trail leading up the cliff. "We have 3 days to prepare," he said. "We're going back up. I'm going to claim my throne, and I'm going to make Rick Salinger wish he had died 20 years ago." Sophie looked at him, seeing the king beneath the scars. Her heart swelled with a fierce pride. "I'm coming with you," she said. "It will be dangerous," Declan warned. "It will be war." "Good," Sophie said, her violet eyes flashing. "I have a debt to settle too." Declan looked at her, and for the first time, he reached out and cupped her cheek. His thumb traced her jawline. "Then let's go burn their world down, my queen." The word hung in the air, heavy and promising. He hadn't marked her, but the title was there. The sacrifice and the cursed wolf were dead. The king and his queen were rising, The climb out of Blackwood Ravine was a physical manifestation of hell. The path Sophie had been forced down at gunpoint was treacherous enough going down, but climbing up it, against gravity, in sub-zero temperatures, with the wind trying to peel them off the cliff face, was nearly impossible. But they were fueled by something hotter than fire, vengeance. They moved at night to avoid detection. Decan led the way, his massive frame shielding Sophie from the worst of the biting wind. He had packed a rucksack with supplies from the manor, the rest of the dried meat, a coil of rope, and weapons. He carried the heavy recurve bow across his back, and at his hip a jagged hunting knife made of cold iron. By the time they reached the rusted guardrail at the top of the cliff, it was the dawn of the third day. The day of the winter solstice. The day of the wedding. Sophie collapsed onto the frozen asphalt of the old road, her chest heaving. She was exhausted, her fingers raw despite the gloves Decan had found for her. Decan didn't rest. He stood on the edge of the precipice, looking out over the valley. The territory of the Silver Moon Pack was spread out below them, a blanket of white suffocated by grey fog. From this height, they could see the smoke rising from the chimneys of the village and the distant, glittering lights of the pack house on the hill. "It looks peaceful from here," Sophie wheezed, standing up to join him. "It looks like a graveyard," Decan corrected, his voice devoid of emotion. "But the dead are about to wake up." He turned to her. He had used a razor from the manor to shave off the thick, unkempt beard, leaving only a heavy shadow of stubble. His hair was tied back. Without the matted fur and the grime, the transformation was shocking. He didn't look like a wild beast anymore. He looked like what he was, an aristocrat, a warrior, a king. The scars on his face didn't mar his beauty. They only added a terrifying history to it. "We need to get to the village before noon," Decan said. "The ceremony begins when the sun is at its highest point. That's when the pack magic is strongest." "How are we going to get in?" Sophie asked. "Rick will have guards everywhere, especially after Jax came back." "Jax is a coward," Decan said, adjusting his coat. "He would have told Rick I was dead. He wouldn't admit that he let a dead man let him go. Rick thinks he's safe. That is his weakness." They hiked down the mountain road, sticking to the tree line. As they approached the outskirts of the town of Oakhaven, the reality of the pack's suffering became visible. The houses were dark. The streets were empty. Sophie saw a group of pups huddled together near a trash fire in an alleyway, their ribs showing through their thin coats. The bakery, usually bustling with holiday orders, was boarded up. "My God," Sophie whispered. "It's worse than I thought." "This is what happens when a beta tries to wear an alpha's crown," Decan growled. "He takes, but he cannot give." They made their way to a small, dilapidated cottage on the edge of town. Sophie's old home. It had been seized by the pack after her parents died, but it was currently empty, the windows cracked. They slipped inside. It was freezing, but it offered cover. "We wait here until the bells ring," Decan said. Sophie looked around the empty living room where she had spent her childhood. The memories threatened to overwhelm her, but she pushed them down. She turned to Decan. "Decan," she said softly, "if this goes wrong, if Rick has too many men, it won't go wrong." "But if it does," she insisted, stepping closer to him. "I want you to know. I don't regret walking into the dark with you." Decan looked down at her. The intensity in his amber eyes was scorching. He reached out, his hand wrapping around the back of her neck, his thumb stroking her pulse point. "You were never the sacrifice, Sophie," he murmured, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. "You were the gift. The only thing this world has ever given me that I didn't have to fight for." He leaned down, pressing his forehead against hers. "When I walk into that hall, I'm not just claiming my title, I'm claiming you." "Then mark me," she whispered. "Do it now. Let the bond snap into place. Let me be yours completely." Declan pulled back slightly, shaking his head. "No." Sophie felt a sting of rejection. "Why? Do you not want me?" "I want you more than I want my next breath," Declan said fiercely. "But I will not mark you in the shadows of a broken cottage like a thief stealing a prize. I will not make you my mate while you are an outcast." He straightened up, his shoulders squaring. "I will mark you on the throne. I will mark you in front of the people who spat on you. They will see you as their queen before they see you as my mate." Sophie's heart swelled. He was offering her dignity. He was offering her respect. "Okay," she breathed. "Let's go get our throne." At 12 o'clock sharp, the church bells of the Pack House Chapel began to toll. The sound was mournful in the cold air. Declan moved to the door. He checked his knife. He checked his bow. "Stay close to me," he commanded. "Don't stop walking, no matter who screams." They walked out of the cottage and onto the main road. They didn't sneak. They didn't hide. They walked right down the center of the street. People peered out of their windows. A few gasped. Someone whispered, "Is that Sophie?" But no one recognized the tall, scarred man beside her. His aura was dampened, his power coiled tight inside him, waiting to explode. They reached the gates of the Pack House estate. 2 guards stood there, shivering in their dress uniforms. "Halt!" one shouted, reaching for his stun baton. "Private event! No entry for—" Declan didn't even slow down. He simply looked at the guard. He released a fraction of his alpha intent, a directed blast of dominance. "Open the gate," Declan said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of a landslide. The guard's eyes rolled back in his head. His wolf recognized a superior predator. His knees buckled, and he scrambled to hit the release button. The iron gates groaned open. "Who are you?" the other guard stammered, terrified. Declan didn't answer. He just kept walking, Sophie at his side, up the long driveway, lined with expensive imported ice sculptures that were slowly melting, just like Rick's rain. The grand hall of the Silver Moon Pack was decorated with obscene opulence. While the pups in the village starved, the tables here groaned under the weight of roasted pigs, towers of seafood, and fountains of champagne. Hundreds of guests filled the pews. Half were Rick's loyalists, fat and happy. The other half were members of the Iron River Pack, the buyers who had come to inspect their new purchase. At the altar stood Rick Salinger. He wore a white tuxedo that cost more than most pack members earned in a year. He looked smug, his hair slicked back, a glass of scotch in his hand as he waited for his bride. The music swelled. The doors at the back of the hall didn't open for the bride. She was already at the altar, having entered from the side. Isabella. Sophie saw her and gasped. Isabella was breathtakingly beautiful, with cascading blonde hair and a dress made of silk and diamonds. But her face was cold, her eyes calculating. This was the woman who had looked at a bleeding, broken Declan and walked away. The officiant, a corrupt elder named Marcus, raised his hands. "We gather here today to unite the Alpha Richard Salinger and the Lady Isabella of Iron River," Marcus droned, "and to unite our territories. Through this union, the Silver Moon lands are formally ceded to the Iron River management." A murmur of unease went through the Silver Moon members in the back. Ceded? Not merged? It was a hostile takeover disguised as a wedding. "If anyone has just cause why this union should not proceed," Marcus said, rushing through the words, "speak now or forever. Hold your—" Boom! The heavy double doors at the back of the hall didn't just open, they were blown off their hinges. Splinters of wood rained down on the back rows. The music cut out instantly. Every head turned. Standing in the debris, framed by the grey light of the winter afternoon, was Declan Blackwood. He wore tattered jeans, heavy boots, and a black coat that billowed around him like a cape. He looked like a god of war carved from granite. And beside him, head held high, was the sacrificial lamb, Sophie Mercer. "I have a cause," Declan's voice thundered, echoing off the vaulted ceiling. It wasn't a shout. It was a growl that vibrated in the bones of every shifter in the room. Rick dropped his glass. It shattered on the marble floor. His face went drained of all color, leaving him looking like a wax figure. "No," Rick whispered. "You're dead. Jax said you were dead." Declan began to walk down the aisle. The guests scrambled out of his way, tripping over each other to escape the radius of power radiating from him. It was a physical pressure, heavy and suffocating. "You buried a boy, Rick," Declan said, his footsteps heavy and rhythmic. "But you dug up a king." Isabella turned around. Her eyes widened. She took a step forward, her lips parting. "Declan?" Declan didn't even look at her. His gaze was locked on Rick. "Guards!" Rick screamed, his voice cracking. "Kill him! Kill them both!" 10 enforcers rushed from the sides of the room, shifting into wolves mid-air. "Get back!" Declan said to Sophie. He didn't draw a weapon. As the first wolf lunged, Declan simply caught it by the throat and threw it into the pews. He moved with a brutal, terrifying efficiency. He broke bones with singular strikes. He didn't shift. He didn't need to. His human form was fueled by 20 years of rage and the raw magic of the land. It was a massacre. In less than a minute, 10 of Rick's best men lay groaning on the floor. Declan stood at the base of the altar steps, blood dripping from his knuckles. He looked up at Rick. "Get off my stage," Declan said. Rick was trembling. He looked at the Iron River Alpha, Isabella's father, who was sitting in the front row. "Help me! We have a deal!" The Iron River Alpha stood up. He was a large man, a veteran warrior. He looked at Declan, then he looked at the glowing amber eyes that marked the true lineage of the kings. He sniffed the air and smelled the ozone and ancient magic. "The deal is void," the Iron River Alpha said calmly. "I don't do business with usurpers or corpses." He sat back down, crossing his arms. Rick was alone. "Isabella," Rick pleaded, turning to his bride. Isabella looked at Rick with disgust. Then she looked at Declan. A hungry, desperate look entered her eyes. She saw the power. She saw the king returned. She gathered her skirts and ran down the steps, stopping just inches from Declan. "Declan," she wept, reaching for his hand. "Oh, thank the goddess. You survived. You have no idea what he made me do. He forced me to reject you. He threatened my family. Please, tell them we are mates." The hall went silent. Everyone watched. The tragic reunion. Declan looked down at her hand on his arm. He gently peeled her fingers off. "You chose, Isabella," he said, his voice quiet and cold as the grave. "You looked me in the eye while I bled, and you chose him. You didn't do it for safety. You did it because you thought he was the winner." "No, I love you," she cried, trying to grab him again. "You don't love me," Declan said. "You love the crown." He stepped past her, as if she were nothing more than a piece of furniture. Isabella collapsed on the steps, wailing, her humiliation complete. Declan walked up the steps to the altar. Rick backed away until he hit the wall. "Please," Rick begged, tears streaming down his face. "I'll leave. I'll go rogue. Just let me go." "Did you let me go?" Declan asked. I was young. My father made me." And did you let her go?" Declan pointed to Sophie, who was standing in the aisle, watching with wide, vindicated eyes. "You dragged an innocent girl to a frozen ravine and threw her away to cover up your own incompetence." Declan grabbed Rick by the throat and lifted him off the ground. Rick clawed at Declan's arm, his legs kicking uselessly. "The land is dying, Rick. It demands a sacrifice, a real one." Declan turned to the crowd. "I, Declan Blackwood, true alpha and high king of the 5 territories, challenge Richard Salinger for the position of pack leader. To the death." "I yield," Rick choked out. "I yield." "The law of the ravine does not accept yields," Declan whispered. "He didn't kill him there. That would be too quick." "Take him," Declan ordered the Iron River guards. "Take him to the Blackwood ravine. Strip him naked. Bind his hands with silver." Rick screamed as he was dragged away. "No, not the cold. Please, not the cold." "If you are a true leader," Declan called after him, "the land will save you. If you are a traitor, the frost will take you." Everyone knew Rick wouldn't survive the night. Declan turned back to the hall. He took a deep breath. The air in the room seemed to shift. The heaviness lifted. "The winter is over," he announced. He extended his hand toward Sophie. "Come here." Sophie walked up the aisle. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst. She passed Isabella, who was still sobbing on the floor. She passed the elders who had condemned her. She walked up the steps and took Declan's hand. He pulled her close, facing the crowd. "This pack has been rot," Declan said, his voice ringing out. "You stood by while a tyrant starved your children. You stood by while he murdered your kin. You are all guilty." He paused. "But this woman," he raised Sophie's hand. "She faced the beast and did not flinch. She faced the cold and did not break. She is the only one among you worthy of this bloodline." Declan turned to Sophie. He cupped her face with both hands. "I, Declan Blackwood, reject the past. I accept the future." He leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't a chaste wedding kiss. It was a claiming. It was fierce and possessive. As their lips met, Declan's canines extended. He tilted her head back and sank his teeth into the junction of her neck and shoulder. Sophie cried out, not in pain, but in ecstasy. A wave of golden light erupted from them, sweeping through the hall. The mark formed instantly on her skin, a black wolf entwined with a silver moon. The bond snapped into place, a bridge of iron and fire connecting their souls. Sophie felt his power flood into her, and he felt her warmth flood into him. Declan pulled back, licking the drop of blood from her skin. He looked at the crowd, his eyes glowing brighter than ever. "Behold your queen!" he roared. One by one, the wolves in the hall fell to their knees. The Iron River Alpha knelt. The corrupt elders knelt. Even Isabella, defeated and broken, bowed her head. "Long live the king!" the crowd chanted, the sound growing like a storm. "Long live the queen!" Outside the stained glass windows, a miracle happened. The grey clouds broke apart. A beam of golden sunlight pierced the gloom, hitting the snow, and where the light touched, the ice began to melt. A single green shoot pushed up through the frost. The curse was broken. The king had returned, and he had brought the spring with him. 3 months later. The Blackwood Manor was no longer a ruin. It was being rebuilt, stone by stone, by the very hands that had once let it rot. The pack worked day and night, fueled by the abundance of the new season. The herds had returned. The river was flowing. Sophie sat on the terrace, watching the sunset. She wore a dress of deep violet, the color of her eyes, and a silver crown that felt heavy but right on her brow. Declan stepped up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. He buried his face in her hair. He still had the scars, and he still had the nightmares, but he wasn't cold anymore. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "I was thinking about the ravine," she said. "How terrified I was. And now?" Sophie turned in his arms. She traced the scar on his cheek. "Now, I know that sometimes you have to fall to find the person who will catch you." Declan smiled, a true, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "I will always catch you, Sophie." He kissed her, and around them, the flowers of Oakhaven bloomed in a riot of color, celebrating the love of the wolf and his sacrifice. Wow. I don't think Rick is going to enjoy his stay in the ravine, do you? Talk about instant karma. It's satisfying to see Declan finally get his throne back, but even more satisfying seeing Sophie go from the outcast maid to the queen of the entire territory. Isabella definitely learned the hard way that you don't trade true love for a cheap crown. What did you guys think of Declan's revenge? Was throwing Rick into the ravine too harsh, or was it exactly what he deserved? I want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Type Team Declan if you think he did the right thing. If you enjoyed this story of betrayal, magic, and romance, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow, so I can bring you more long stories like this one. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you never miss the next part of our werewolf saga. I've got a story coming up next week about a billionaire CEO who rejects his pregnant mate, only to find out she's the daughter of his biggest investor. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.